We're seeing an increasing number of people who are opting, and women opting out of corporate life to go and consult, to work for themselves. What is your take on this, and what do people need to think about before making that leap?
We are seeing a lot more, and I'd say that there's probably two reasons for this. One is that people can't find the flexibility that they want in their current roles or when they're looking for new opportunities. And so the way to find that flexibility is often for people to become consultants where they can take more control over how and where they work. And so we're seeing a lot of people doing that because it's a way of taking back control. But I also wouldn't admit the point that a lot of people do this at a stage in their career where they're done with working for companies. You know, they just want that control back. So people want consultancy because they want to use all their skills and expertise, but they want to do it on their terms, and that's a choice. Yeah, not just because they've been pushed out of the job market, or not just because they can't find a role, but because they actually want to take control and have autonomy and build their own flexibility and their own life and how and when they work. So it's not always that they've been pushed out. It is a choice at a certain point in your career where you think that's something that I really want to do now. The things that I would ask people to think about are that you're not going to have a guaranteed income and salary check at the end of each month, and that can be challenging. You're going to have to learn how to sell yourself and position yourself. And there's a whole lot of skills that come with consultancy. And the things that you need to think about, are can you sell? Can you go in and position yourself? Can you market yourself? How are you going to package yourself? Can you network? Or do you feel comfortable about networking? Because you're going to have to go out and actually find jobs. It's a hustle. It is a hustle, Jessica. Let's not call
Well,
it
you
anything.
and I both know this, and it's an entirely different skill set to your consultancy skills, unless your consultancy skills are around sales, account management, and new business development. And I think you've got to want to learn those skills. And I
100%.
think you've got to have some aptitude in that direction.
Because
So
there are
we're
lots of
designing.
people who have got lots of skills, but in terms of what they know and what they can share, but would find it really difficult to go out and sell themselves and package themselves and market themselves. Also, you need to think about, can you handle uncertainty? Because being a consultant is quite uncertain. And do you have a financial runway? Do you have enough money behind you that you can, create the consultancy and leverage? Because if you don't, then you're putting yourself in a position, because it's not easy. And once you're established, it becomes easier. But establishing yourself as a consultant can be quite tricky in the beginning. And
It
it's
absolutely can. And I'd want to jump in there, and it's fresh in my mind. I was at the celebration event last week with one of my past coachees from Barton Wilmore, which is planning consultancy, design consultancy, that was bought by Stantec. So she was a partner at Barton Wilmore. Bought by Stantec. She did several years at Stantec and then decided she was going to go out by herself, well, with someone else, set up a consultancy. And she's been successful from the get-go, I think, because she gave herself time to think about how this consultancy was going to work, how the BD was going to work. So she wasn't just making a sudden decision. She had it in the back of her mind. This is what I'm going to do. And she ended her job, took some time out. She was able to do that because she'd given herself financial runway, and then set up the consultancy, having done a lot of networking, understanding of the market, before she then decided to start the consultancy and get off the ground with the first client. So a lot of thoughtfulness, intentionality, giving herself runway.
I
And I
think
also think, go on.
no, I think that's really smart, but I think that that's a trend that we're seeing a lot now. So I think that people are building what we call portfolio careers, where
Mm,
people are still employed, but they're still
mm,
starting to dabble in consultancy outside
mm.
employment. And so what that does is it leaves you in employment where you have that security, but behind the scenes, you're sort of, as you just said, building that financial runway, building that network, having those conversations, positioning yourself and running them side by side for a while. So lots of times people start with side hustles that then take over their proper job. And so that's a really clever way of doing it. So if you're thinking about moving out into setting up your own business and running a consultancy, like starting to run it at the beginning as a bit of a side hustle, doing all that work, doing the research, understanding is there a need, who would my clients be, doing all of that legwork sets you up in a really good position. Because then, and I know lots of people who have done that. So there's an accountant who I know really well who was working in accountancy for many years. Then she started to take on some clients. She had one and then she had two, and she was like, at what point am I going to feel that I'm able to leave the paid job? And she got to a point where she felt that she'd done enough and she had that security and she could make it work. So I'd say to people thinking about doing this, lots of people don't just want to resign and then just throw themselves straight into setting up a consultancy. So do that work, run it as a side hustle, think about whether you can do that alongside your current job and have those sorts of conversations, so that you're not sort of taking yourself straight out of employment and then putting yourself in that position where suddenly a consultant and you've got to start from scratch building a business. Because being good at your job and being a business owner and having a business are two really different things.
They absolutely are. And I don't think enough people consider the idea of bringing someone else in, super part-time to start with, to support them, say, with BD, all those business processes, and build it into the financial plan for the business. Recognizing that if you are not great at sales, it might pay dividends to have somebody working with you from the start to position you as the expert, as someone who has worked with businesses like that potential client, and why that person would be a good choice for that business. It doesn't have to be you doing your own BD. You can come into the conversation later, but I don't think many people think about that because they see the cost.
Yeah, well, I think you and I are good examples of that, Jessica. Very good examples.
I think we are.